Anyways, I get a frantic call from Tessering as I'm
Uh-oh.
watching this beautiful scene. And she says, Michael, what are you doing? The chief of police just came to my house
Uh-oh.
into the hotel, which, is her house as well. She said, they said that we moved the blinds. Are you watching from the window? The king can see you.
Oh my. Hello and welcome to One-Off Travel Stories. I'm your host, Andrew Tawas-Jurna. Here each week I will chat with someone about one of their favorite travel stories. That one story they've told countless times to friends and family around the dinner table. We'll hear captivating and sometimes unbelievable travel tales and learn about the locations where they happen. Today we'll be joined by a friend of mine, Michael Bervell. Michael is an amazing person. He's really done so much. He is an entrepreneur. He recently founded a company. He's an angel investor and has invested in a lot of startups. He's also an author of an amazing book, Unlocking Unicorns. Definitely go check that out. I could probably be doing this intro for the next 5 to 10 minutes about stuff he's done in his life, but he's got a website, michaelbervell.com. Definitely go check him out. He's got an incredible background. Michael is wrapping up an MBA degree at Harvard University right now, and consequently, as a lot of students do, he's been traveling. He's been traveling a lot with the program, with his friends in the program, and just taking advantage of all the opportunities given to him. He's going to tell us a story today. We had a great conversation and about his trip to Bhutan, a place that I've many times sort of looked into going. I think a lot of people have, but it's very difficult to get to. And I really didn't know that much about. Michael's going to do a great job walking through what he learned in Bhutan, but at the same time, telling a story that is perfect for this podcast in terms of it being unique and really not one you could ever replicate in the same way. So please enjoy. Hey, Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Andrew. I'm excited to be here.
Really excited to have you. Thanks for taking the time. Before we jump into it, would love to know, I know you've been moving around a lot, doing some traveling. Where are you at today? Where are you living? Where are you right now?
Yeah, currently right now, I am sitting outside of Aldrich Hall. I think some people know what Aldrich is, but it's right at the Harvard Business School campus in Cambridge. Today is the African American Student Union's conference. It's like an annual conference, 51st annual. So I stepped out to record this podcast, and afterwards I'm going to go back and learn about being Black in private equity. So it'll be kind of fun popping in, popping out, talking about travel, reminiscing, and thinking about the future as well.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you stepping out to do this. I know, I actually don't know the answer. Are you involved? Like, how are you involved with the community? I know from previous experience, you tend to take a lot of leadership roles in these type of things. So
Yeah, it's funny. I came to HBS and I decided I want to be an observer. Like I usually am always like from high school. I was like student body president, editor in chief of the newspaper, captain of the debate team. And like they don't have those exact clubs here at the business school, but they have the same idea. Like if you really want to be involved, you can be doing everything and anything under the sun. But I opted to just be an observer of the experience and focus pretty much all my energy on working on my startup, which is what I'll be doing after I graduate.
okay, that's awesome. Yeah, I was gonna say, why? I actually just curious too. Like, how is that? I know you're in your second year of the program. How has that felt being like an observer versus, kind of taking charge of a lot of these clubs and events and stuff like that?
Yeah, what's nice about the 2 year experience at HBS is like the first year, I was a bit more active, so I ended up being section president. And the way that the business school is arranged, there's like 1,000 students per class, and every student is put into something called a section. And so there's 10 sections of 100 students each. So for your whole first year, all of your classes you take with your section. It's kind of like, middle school or maybe even like elementary school, where you sit in the same classroom in the same seats next to the same people, and your professors rotate throughout the year. And of course, because you're next to everyone and hanging out, there's like the student leadership component where they have section president, section social chair, section women's reps or diversity, equity, and inclusion rep, whatever it is. So I was section president for the first year, which was super engaged, super involved. And then this year to be an observer, it's just kind of nice, right? To not have to be the leader, but to be the one that's like, you guys should change X, Y, Z, and not have to execute on it, but just be the one suggesting. It's definitely a change in pace. And like you mentioned, I mean, even when we used to work together, I always put my hands in like 20 cakes. So now I only have my hands in three, which is a little bit easier.
Yeah. Well, I do work with startups, so I know how much focus that takes. Makes a lot of sense. It also sounds like you've moved from like, you know, um, student affairs lead on a lot of things to more like advisor. you've you've grown to that stage, advisor and consultant.
Yes, I am the wise one with whom you ask your questions. That's me.
Um, well, I honestly, we could probably do a whole podcast on this sort of line of questions about your school experience because that sounds really interesting. However, I know you've got a great story lined up that is travel themed. As per the podcast, we'd love to hear those one-off stories. So I guess I'll start with the typical question. Can you, give us a little context on and background on the story you're about to tell? Where were you? What year was it? What were the sort of circumstances for your travels?
Yeah, it was the winter of 2023, a long, cold, and stormy night in Boston. No, no, but it was winter break of my second year of business school. And what's notorious at HBS is that every winter break, people travel all over the place. And so there's, some really famous treks. We call them treks, which are these like group travel experiences. So the
Right.
Saudi Arabia trek was a super popular one, right? That one had like 150 people going. Tickets were like $3,000. It included camping in the desert. You go to Saudi Aramco, you'd meet a bunch of CEOs. So it's business, it's fun,
Mm.
etc. And I had done a lot of HBS treks during my time at the business school. I was traveling pretty much every weekend or every other weekend to different countries, different cities, etc. So I was kind of trekked out. I didn't want to do another HBS trek, but I did want to do something. So it was the second week of November, and I was talking with my friends on campus. One of the guys' names, his name is Sitch. I was like, Sitch, what are you doing for winter break? Because like me, Sitch had always gone on every single trek. Like he's even to this day notorious for being like the trek expert. And he's like, well,
Right.
there's this Harvard Kennedy School trek, and they're going to Bhutan. And I was like, what is a Bhutan? Like even like a baton, like the thing that like conductors use. He's like, no, Bhutan is this country in South Asia. You should come. So that's kind of how it started. That's how the story starts. I had went to an info session, went on WhatsApp, joined the WhatsApp group, paid my deposit, um, and decided I was going to fly to Bhutan. And this was maybe 4 weeks before it happened. I was going to leave the day before finals started, so I was skipping all my finals in person. Decided to take all my finals online during my layovers and embark on this journey to Bhutan. Uh, which I think the highlight of it was we got some really amazing access, and this is the story of how I almost met the King of Bhutan.
Okay, I love that. That's amazing. Yeah, so going back to the treks, that's yeah, I attended business school as well. I remember that feeling being trekked out. Although I will say, if going from being trekked out to jumping on board to fly to Bhutan from Boston, obviously you can't turn down a great experience.
Well, what made it so cool, this is the reason I went. I was like, Stitch, like, I've gone on like at least 15 treks. Like, why would I join another one? And he's like, no, 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 this one is different. Because apparently the person who's planning it is the daughter of the king.
Ooh,
I was like,
ooh.
okay, okay. I was like, Stitch, are you He's like, yeah. Like, I looked at the names, I Google searched. It's the daughter of the, like, you have to come on this trek. I was like, okay, if this is my last trek I ever do for Harvard, I'll do that one. And it was at the Kennedy School, so it's going to be a bit more academic. You're going to meet some politicians, et cetera, et cetera. So it didn't feel like a typical business school trek. So a couple of reasons I was like, okay, this seems worth going to.
Okay, cool. And actually, I'm not aware. Can you explain the Kennedy School?
Yeah, so one of the graduate schools that they have here at Harvard is a school specifically dedicated to like public policy. So the Harvard Kennedy School, I think named after JFK, is the School of Public Policy. So kind of like what Georgetown has. I guess that's like Harvard's copycat of it. So lots of people who go there end up going into government, lobbying,
Right.
think tank work, and their treks. They also have treks, but they tend to be a bit more subsidized. It tends to be application only, and because of those two factors, they can do smaller treks that get kind of exclusive access to go to a parliament building or meet a secretary general or something else like that.
Okay. So, in contrast to maybe the Saudi Arabia, it won't be so kind of business focused, meeting corporation CEOs, more on the political end of things.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay. Awesome. That's interesting. Okay, well, now you're on this list. Did you have to do anything to prepare for your trip? What was the build up like?
Yeah, I had to Google search where is Bhutan. I honestly, when I tell you I had no idea what this country was, I did all this research and I discovered a bunch of different things. One of the things I discovered was Bhutan invented this concept called gross national happiness, which they used to measure the country in addition to GDP. And they had like all these different frameworks for what gross national happiness is, but the bottom line is Bhutan is like at its core a Buddhist country, and they
Right.
wanted to not just have capitalism as they grew into the 21st century, but they wanted to have like Buddhist capitalism, like a more conscious and aware type of capitalism. And pretty much before 1974, like no tourists could go to Bhutan. So it was a country that recently opened up to the world and still wanted to preserve its culture while also being opened up. So they had this GNH, gross national happiness, which was focused on measuring people's like economic well-being, measuring environmental well-being, and so on and so forth. So that was what I learned when I started my initial research. Then I discovered that Bhutan is the only like carbon negative country in the world. Like they end up creating more energy using hydroelectricity than they end up consuming, which is also fascinating, right? Especially given the fact that it's quite a small population, about 750,000 people, and wedged
Right.
right between like China and India. So super, super, super fascinating. Just when I first heard all that stuff, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll pack my t-shirts and shorts. It's the southern hemisphere. It'll be summertime. I guess I'll be really, really warm. And I was in for a rude awakening when I landed in Bhutan because I realized it's in the middle of the mountains.
Yeah.
I wore the same outfit for 8 days because I only had one sweater. It was the sweater that I packed when I was leaving Boston. But I had a lot of shorts and t-shirts that I changed into as well.
Actually, and maybe you looked this up too. I had an idea of where it was, but I've got no idea what the altitude is. Like, how high do you have a sense of how high up you were?
Oh man, I don't remember. I think it's probably
Okay.
like anywhere between 8 to 11,000 feet at any given
Yeah.
time, at least for the treks above sea level. Which maybe we should translate that into meters for your international listeners. But it was pretty high.
Like 3,000 ish. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it wasn't. So even though it was quote unquote summertime, like I had landed in Bangkok for a couple days beforehand to hang out with an old college buddy of mine. It was so hot in Bangkok that I was like, oh,
Right.
it's of course going to be the same temperature in Bhutan, but the elevation was just it was really cold. Yeah.
Okay. So you're landing in Bhutan. You've done some homework, which is nice. You know a little background. You've got very few. You've got very few outfits. Let's put it that way, or at least weather responsible outfits. Yeah. How did from your research? How did it sort of match up when you arrived?
Yeah. So we landed, and I realized immediately that there's no internet. I'm used to traveling with like my T-Mobile Magenta plan, where I can like have at least like basic data in any country I go to. I
Right.
don't realize that Bhutan is excluded from this country list. So I land and I'm supposed to use WhatsApp to communicate with the rest of the group. Luckily, Sitch and I are on the same flight, so at the very least, like I see a couple like HBS folks that I recognize. But of this trip of like 18 people, I really only know like the three other HBS people coming. I don't know anyone else. So we come out of like the airplane, we get off the plane, get our suitcases. I'm like looking around for the king's daughter. I'm like, is she here? Like, what does she look like? What's her name? I know none of these things, but I know that Sitch is there. So we get our suitcases and we go outside. And in like classic Trek fashion, there's like this guide that has like a little Harvard logo, and pulls us over and is like, okay, come into this van. Okay, sure, I'll get into a van with a stranger with Sitch and a couple other friends. Why not? And so we meet a couple new people, and we get in this van, and the five of us start driving to the capital city, which is where we're going to be staying, which is called Thimphu. And it's pretty nice city in Bhutan. And one of the things that you notice immediately when you get to Bhutan is that it's in the middle of mountain ranges, and so you're driving and like winding down these roads on mountains, and the mountains are beautiful, kind of like what you would imagine a Nepal would look like, or if you've been anywhere in Pakistan, very similar to those mountains. Super mountainous, super dry, heat, and of course cold, but was really just beautiful. And so this is like, you know, face pressed to the window, like a 6 year old looking at all these amazing mountains. And Bhutan is known for its trekking and hiking, in addition to its bird watching. And
Hmm.
because it's covered 60% of the country is covered with trees that are not allowed to be developed, just because of their kind of environmental concerns, it's extremely like fresh and clear, and the air is beautiful. So we drive into Thimphu, um, and it's just you can sense this sense of calm and just kind of like comfort. So we get out of the bus and meet our host, and I realized immediately that the last name of the king is actually quite a common last name. So we're not meeting with the king's daughter. It's just a random woman who has a similar name to the king. So that was they kind of at that moment I was like, okay, that kind of deflates us meeting the king. At least so I thought. I mean, I didn't realize what was going to happen a couple of days later. But we get settled in it. It was kind of the beginning of what I would say is one of my favorite trips I've ever taken.
So wait, did Sitch drop the ball on that? Was he like, wait a second, there's someone
he
on our trip with this
he
last name?
100% dropped the ball. I think he googled the last name of the person or the person he was organizing it, saw that it was the same last name as the king, and just assumed it was the king's daughter. It's almost as if you had gone, to the U.S. and been like, "Oh my gosh, like Stephen Smith is hosting us," and like the last name of the second president was Smith, so like it's Stephen, the son of the president, is hosting us, right? It's just such a common name. I don't even know why I believed him and didn't even think to search myself. Instead, I just decided to pay him come on the trek because I was just like, oh wow, this is gonna be amazing. But yeah, it's just like a super, super, super common last name. Every culture
That's
has them. I just didn't
yeah,
realize what it was in Bhutan.
that's hilarious. One comment actually was really interesting. That did it seem? So you said there's a lot of trees. Did it seem like forested? I was imagining it, but at a certain altitude, the number of trees usually decreases. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah. So it's definitely not forested. Like I wouldn't say it's like a foresty like lush tree. I would say it's like a dry branch, like
right, okay,
a very dry branch tree environment. Yeah. And what's
no,
actually what
that's
you'll notice as well is Bhutan, like their national animal is the dragon. So even when you get to the airport, everything it feels like you've been transported back to like the 18th century. It's like all built out of wood, like very orange, kind of like cedar pine wood. There's lots of orange and yellow, which is colors on the flag. And the airport is like it's tiny. It's like I don't even know how to compare it, but it can't be any larger than like 6 football fields, right? It's super small airport, and they only have 4 flights in and out a day, or something like kind of small like that. So you can imagine a super small country, like the king's photo is everywhere when you walk in. So you just notice this in every building and in every restaurant and in every airport, even the post office. There's just a lot of national pride. And what's also interesting is it's mandatory by the constitution that everyone in Bhutan wears national dress. So everyone's wearing their Bhutanese robes, which are also this really unique color of brown mixed with gold, mixed with a little bit of orange. And so it just really is. It feels unlike any other place I had ever gone to.
yeah. I had no idea. Well, especially about the robes. Um, especially coming from the U.S. where everyone's just wearing everything.
Yeah,
Yeah, that must be a really interesting experience. And on the, you mentioned they had opened up not too long ago to tourists or anyone from outside of the country, and there being only a handful of flights. Like, I'm assuming there weren't many tourists, but also, did it seem like they were accepting and welcoming? Like, did they want tourists? I guess is my question.
Oh yeah, totally. It was totally welcoming, totally accepting. Super educated population as well. So there was not one person I met who wasn't like extremely proficient in English. I think the literacy rate is like
Hmm.
at or above like 85, 90%. So like even, the taxi drivers are extremely like smart and responsive. Um, and so it was actually in that sense super super fun to go because you could have a conversation with anybody at any level of society and really get a sense for what the culture was like.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
and for context, we get into Thimphu, this capital
Yeah.
city of Bhutan, right? They have one stoplight. So as soon as we get in, they're like, "Let's take you on a tour of Thimphu." We walk around this town for 45 minutes. We've seen the whole town, and I'm like, I talked to our guide because almost kind of like North Korea, when you go to Bhutan, you have to have a guide with you at all times, pretty much.
Right.
And so we couldn't actually just walk around the city. The guide had to walk around with us. So I asked the guide, and I'm like, what is that over there? And he's like, oh, that is the one traffic light that we have in Bhutan. So you can imagine, like, it's not a high traffic city. It's a lot of people walking around, like very much like what you would imagine. I mean, they have cars and stuff there, but like, everyone knows everyone, right? There's markets. People go to the market to get their groceries. They go home, they cook them, they eat them. They go to the market again the next day. So
Right.
it is really this sense of it's a very communal and happy place that has this strong, strong, strong cultural alignment. So that was getting into Bhutan, and we unpack, we settle in, and of course, like any trip, they have like the first day where they tell you about what to expect on the trip. And like any good traveler, I had not looked at the itinerary because I kind of just showed up. I mean, I
Yeah.
was already upset that I didn't get to meet the daughter of the king of Bhutan. So like, what else? Little did I know that I don't even think the king had a daughter. So that's a whole other story. but, but I was
um,
just like, I was there for the ride, to see what else would happen next.
I'll give you a pass. I know I'll give you a pass because I feel like that's just when you're a student. You in business school, you've got so much going on. It's just kind of like pack your bag and go. You
Literally,
know?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And so on night one, they tell us what we're going to be doing, and they say, you guys have come at a really special time because actually we have Bhutanese National Day happening in 2 or 3 days. And I'm like,
Oh,
well, what is Bhutanese National Day? And they're like, oh, it's the biggest event of the year in Bhutan, like their version of the Super Bowl.
yeah, that's amazing.
About 100,000 people from all across the country. I think this year when we went, it was 200,000 people descend from all over the country in order to come to the Thimphu Center, like this public outdoor stadium where normally they play archery. I mean, fun fact about Bhutan: the national sport is archery, and pretty much
Huh.
all the Olympic winners in archery for the last many decades have been Bhutanese. That's like their national
Wow.
export is archery. So like everyone descends from all over the country to the stadium where normally they play archery because the king is coming, and the king comes with his family and the king's king and all of the king's guests, and they have this beautiful free 8-hour event with music, dancing, and everything. And because you guys are tourists coming around this time, we've been able to get you tickets. And we were like shocked, right? We were like, oh my god, like we're essentially going to the Super Bowl for free. Is like the equivalent, right?
Yeah, from my pretty limited experience, but national days are just so much fun, pretty much
Yeah.
everywhere.
Oh
Not
yeah.
to mention a place so unique.
Yeah. And this is my first national day ever, right? Because we don't really have that in the US. 4th of July is 4th of July, but you just let off some fireworks in your backyard. And so to go to like a national day capital, it was pretty cool. So that was 2 days after we arrived. The second day, we eat some traditional Bhutanese food, kind of get to walk around. The food there is called chili and cheese. That's one of the national dishes.
Hmm.
It's exactly what it sounds like. I went to the kitchen of one of the restaurants to see how they make it, and they put oil in a pan, then they put chilies in the pan, and they put cheese in the pan. It's chili cheese, and then you eat it. So
I'm into it. I'm into it. Not gonna lie.
it was pretty funny, yeah. So we had a lot of chili cheese. I was lactose intolerant, so it wasn't super great, but we still ate it. And we wake up, 2 days into the trip, and it's National Day, and they've arranged for us all to have Bhutanese national dress. So they've gone to like one of the tailors of Bhutan. They've gotten all of our measurements, and they get us dressed up in traditional Bhutanese clothing. And we wake up and go down to breakfast. And I should also say who our hosts are. The two hosts that we have, one of the guys, his name is Kenga. He's an amazing guy. He actually runs the third largest political party in Bhutan, but only the top two political parties are represented in parliament. So he used to be in parliament, then he lost the latest election, is now out of parliament, but he graduated from the Harvard Kennedy School in the 90s, and every year for the last probably 8 or 9 years has been organizing trips to Bhutan for Harvard students and Harvard affiliates. So pretty much we have this very well-connected political guy who's hosting us. And second,
Cool.
we have, and it's important, his name is Kenga. It's very important in the story. And
Kanga,
second, we
got
have
it.
his wife, who owns really one of the oldest five-star hotels in Bhutan, and that's where we're all staying. You pretty much say, we're staying at the clock tower, and they know exactly which hotel you're staying at because it's right next to the clock tower. And the clock tower, for reference, is very close to the stadium. So if you go to the top floor of the clock tower of the hotel, from the sixth floor of the hotel, you can see into the stadium quite perfectly.
Nice.
So we all wake up. They say everyone has to wake up by 8 a.m. Don't be late. We all wake up, we get dressed, we go downstairs, we have breakfast. And Tessering, who's the wife of Kenga, who owns this hotel, said, "Guys, I know we told you guys to wake up at 8 and be ready by 9, but we have to go at 8:15 because there have been people standing outside the stadium since 10 p.m. last night trying to go into National Day." And I don't know what was so special about this National Day. Maybe it's the first one post-COVID, but
Right.
they expected 100,000 people. They ended up having close to, if not over 200,000. And so not everyone who got there could actually go into the stadium. And even as tourists, we got no special privileges or special access. So even we technically could not go into the stadium unless we also waited in line. So
Right.
I was late, running on late time. We split the group into two. 10 people ran immediately as Tessering said this to get into the stadium. We were able to get in right as the doors were closing. And me, Sitch, of course, and 3 or 4 other people were too slow. So we couldn't make it inside. So
Oops.
we're on WhatsApp. All of our friends, we've now gotten SIM cards. All of our friends are sending us pictures of the inside of the stadium. Apparently, the king is handing out free money with his face on it, Bhutanese currency. Everyone in the stadium gets currency and free snacks. Meanwhile, we're stuck at the hotel watching the TV. And I say to Tessering, I'm like, oh, you know what? It's totally okay. Like, I know people have traveled from all over Bhutan to come here. I'm so glad that they got to go inside. And she says, yeah, but you came from the US. Like, aren't you also sad and upset? I was like, no, it's okay. Like, it's totally fine. And I could tell that she was thinking, like, there should be something that I can do. So she disappears. She disappears for 15 minutes. And about 5 minutes later, she comes back and says, "We're going to try to get you in," which
Okay.
is an interesting thing to say. So I'll pause. I don't know. I'll pause to see. I don't want to ruin the story yet, but I'm sitting there. She's like, "We'll try to get you in," and I'm floored. I don't know what's going to happen.
Oh, I like the suspense. So, one question, like, I guess this stadium. I mean, I think of stadiums. I think of our football fields and and basketball stadiums and stuff. Like, how big is it? What does it look like? I'm taking it like most of the festivities happen in there.
Exactly. Yeah. Think of it as like a. It's like a U-shaped stadium. Actually, it's like a football field shaped stadium.
Okay.
But I say U-shaped because one side of the stadium is obviously for like VIP, like very important people. And there's a special entrance. That side of the stadium has what's called the King's Entrance. And it's the door that the king enters from. And behind him is like kind of almost like all of I guess you call it the suites, right? So like all the VIPs are there. They have like food, they have tables and like etc. And the rest of the U, right, is a traditional, sit on the stands, Coliseum-esque stadium. So it's almost as if the Coliseum was shaped as a U and had a flat wall versus being completely rounded. And that
Gotcha.
flat
Okay.
wall is kind of where all the festivities were happening. The king was on stage, they hired dancers from all over the world. There was all this traditional dress. The military had come out and, you know, that was the setup.
Okay. Really interesting. Okay, so you're in the hotel. You're sort of sitting there looking at people's fun pictures. What happens next?
So she says, we're going to try to get you in. But in the meantime, you can watch the live stream on TV. Which honestly,
Sure.
compared to the photos of our friends, was not as great. So she puts on Facebook Live, and we're watching this thing on TV. And what's funny is because the hotel is so close to the stadium, we hear everything happening in the stadium before we see it on TV,
Right.
right? So we'll hear like the gunshots and hear people cheering, and then like 12 seconds later, like we hear the gunshots on Facebook Live and people cheering. And I'm like, this is just, ridiculous. Like, I can't believe like we're not in the stadium, but I totally get it. We woke up too late. We didn't wait in line. It is what it is. But I realized that we could go up to the sixth floor, the very top floor of the hotel. And from one of the windows in the hallway, you can look into the stadium. And Tessering had told me that the police had been knocking on her door around 7 a.m. saying you have to close all of your blinds for security reasons, right? Because not only is the king there, there was rumors that Elon Musk was also there. There was also rumors that there were other individuals there because the king was going to announce on that day that they're building a big city in the south of Bhutan. That they're essentially trying to make like the Singapore of like Southeast Asia. They're trying to make
Gotcha.
that new city, and so they had investors from all over the world. And the king was going to announce this multi-billion-dollar initiative with many of the investors being there. Think oligarchs, Chinese billionaires, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So for security reasons, you can't stand at a high vantage point where we were going to stand because it had a perfect line of sight to all of the VIPs from where
Okay.
we were
Gotcha.
standing. Kind of like the wall of that U-shaped dome I had talked about faced the hotel.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Tessering told us all, don't move the blinds. So I go up to the sixth floor and decide to move the blinds. I pull up a chair, put it right at the window, and I'm looking out, and it's beautiful. You see all of the colors, the orange and the yellow. The way that the military is standing is perfectly in shape of the Bhutanese flag, which has a dragon going all through the middle. And so there's like people in white mimicking the dragon. And it's
Wow.
just such a beautiful scene looking down upon, 150,000 people in a stadium singing, the Bhutanese national anthem, listening to the King of Bhutan. The king's family enters and it's like a round of applause and people are throwing papers in the air. And from our vantage point, you can see all of that. Anyways, I get a frantic call from Tessering as I'm watching this
Uh-oh.
beautiful scene. And she says, Michael, what are you doing? The chief of police just came to my house
Uh-oh.
into the hotel, which, is her house as well. She said, they said that we moved the blinds. Are you watching from the window? The king can see you.
Oh my.
And I was like, yeah, I'm watching from the window. Should I move? She's like, yeah, you can't do that. You have to move. So, I get my 10 minutes of fame, but I think she kind of understands that, like, me and the 5 people who woke up too late are all kind of antsy and really want to do something, really want to go. And so she says, okay, come with me. And so she gets all of us and we sprint outside from the hotel and we sprint to the king's entrance at the back of the stadium. And she ends up calling 3, 4 people who she knows from her husband's military or I guess from her husband's political life that know people in the military. And she says, okay, when the military marches out, I've asked one of the guards to stay behind and let you guys go in. You guys are all tourists and Americans, and you guys should go in and see how much, if you can get in and sit on the stadium. What we didn't
Wow.
realize is the king's entrance only goes to the VIP area. It doesn't go to the general area in the stands. And there's actually
Right.
no way to go from the stands to the king's entrance. So essentially, like if we were to enter, we would have been on the stadium, like on the floor of the stadium, like where all the dancers are and all the musicians. And of course, it's a Buddhist country, so there's a bunch of monks that were there as well. All the reincarnations of past Buddhist relics are also there. So it's kind of like if you're on the floor, like you should have a reason to be there. Luckily,
Yeah.
we're dressed in traditional Bhutanese dress.
Okay.
So we're all standing there. We end up standing for 10, 15, 20 minutes. And finally, we hear the military procession that the king's speech has ended, and the military is about to exit the back door. And so there's this beautiful march. I'll send it to you. Maybe you can post it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Beautiful march of all of the military moving out of the king's entrance and singing a traditional Bhutanese song as they're marching out. And as the last row is going, Tessering pushes 4 people, waves to some random guy who pulls us in. And as the doors are closing for the king's entrance, we've entered into the stadium.
Se- seems like sneaking into a club or something, like
It's absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And we keep looking back, and the doors close. We look around. It's me, Stitch, 3 other people from the Kennedy School, and we're like, "Where's Tessering? Where's Tessering?" So we text her, and she says, "I'm not going to come in. You guys should go. It's for you to experience. I'm from here. It would be bad if I snuck in." And so we're both sad, but happy that we finally got to get in. And of course, you probably know the first thing that we did once we got there. we sent pictures to all of our friends. We were in the stands. We were like, "Oh, you guys are in the stands? Well, we're on the field." And the way that the
Oh
field
my
is split
God.
up is there's the field and then there's the VIP like seating, which is right behind where the king gives his speech. So we were standing on the field for maybe 20 minutes. One group got up from their assigned seats, had to go give some special speech, on the stage. Like these are like the people who are talking, like the politicians, the actors. It's almost like you're sitting next to Kamala Harris and Kamala Harris walks by you to go give a speech before coming back to her seat, right? You imagine the
Gotcha.
inauguration, that's kind of the setup.
Right.
And as she's coming back down, one of the ladies who spoke, she turns to us and she said, "So why are you guys here? Like, I don't know."
Uh-oh.
She doesn't recognize us. And so, we think we're going to get kicked out. A little bit earlier, someone had their camera confiscated because you weren't supposed to be taking pictures from where we were. So, like, we already felt a bit like outsiders. So she said, "Why are you here?" And we said, "Oh, we're Kenga's guests from America." And it's important that we said we're Kenga's guests, but
Right.
what she heard was, "We're the king's guests."
Ah.
So she pretty much gives us the best seats in the house. She's like, "Oh my gosh, you're the king's." She's like, "You're king's guests." And I was like, "Yeah, we're Kenga's guests." "You're the king's guests." "Yes, we're Kenga's guests." And she's like, "Okay, amazing." Ushers us into like this beautiful place on stage where we're now sitting, and it's of course a live stream event. So the live stream that we've been watching before with those empty seats slash full seats, that was now us. We were in
You're
the
just
background
like
of
popping up in the live stream.
every live stream. Probably the only black man in Bhutan. Me sitting there next to Sitch, next to our three other Kennedy School friends. Um, and we knew that we were in a place that we weren't supposed to be when they started passing around plates of food. Because we were like, okay, we're on stage pretty much eating plates of like grapes and rice and chili cheese. And the king is, not even 20 feet away from us, getting up to give speeches with his family and his son and his father. And it was kind of a wild experience. But it only gets better after the event ended.
Okay. So you've been dangerously close to international incidents. So
Yeah. So this is probably the last part of the story, which is really quite fun. And it's kind of, we spend the whole time sitting there in these stands and, we get in maybe around 11 a.m. The event ends around maybe 2. And of course, we're on stage, on camera, so we can't really, get up and leave to go to the bathroom. So I've been having to pee for quite some time.
yeah.
But we're looking at the processions, and there's what's called the Black Hat Dance, which is a traditional Bhutanese dance. It's the only Bhutanese dance with no masks, and it's just black hats.
Hmm.
And it's lots of spitting, lots of drums, lots of chanting. If you think of like kind of the New Zealand pre-rugby kind of like haka chants, it's very similar to those.
Oh,
And
okay.
so we watch some of
Interesting.
those, and we watch a bunch of other really interesting, singers, and all of the kids of Bhutan have come together with their schools to learn different things for the king. Pretty much, they're performing for the king, right? And we're
Yeah.
here, pretty much where the performance is angled towards, so the line on that U-shaped stadium,
Right.
enjoying the experience. So eventually, the military comes back in, does a couple like special things, and marches back out, and the event ends. And I had assumed that when the event ends, we will all leave. But for security and safety reasons, they have everyone else in the stadium leave first, and the VIPs leave last. So, in order to kind of keep us entertained while they're waiting for the stadium to empty out, all of the VIPs go onto the field and start mingling. And I'm kind of curious, who else is here? So I start talking to some of the other people who are there, and I discover there's 2 people. One guy is named Jonathan Rose. Actually, they're both Jonathan Rose. One from the UK, one from the US, and they're
Yeah.
actually 2 amazingly influential real estate developers and architects. Um,
Okay. Makes sense.
Jonathan Rose kind of essentially brought the Bronx out from a lot of the brownfields that happened in the 1990s, and was
Yeah.
kind of the key real estate developer in the Bronx moving into the 2000s, and was kind of one of the first people to think of like green environmental engineering. And I had like studied him, when I was studying architecture, and now here he was with his medal from the King of Bhutan, networking like the rest of us on the field. And so that was pretty
All the
awesome. But
VIPs.
all the VIPs.
Yeah.
And eventually, I look around and I see the king. And I say to Sitch, I'm like, let's get a picture with the king.
No.
And so we line up right behind the head of the military from India. to get a picture with the king of Bhutan. And what I noticed is he has a secret service who's like waving one by one for people to come up and take a picture and then go, and waving to come up and take a picture and go. So he waves up the head of the Indian military, who goes with all of the military people that he brought. They take a picture and they go. And I make eye contact with the king. And then I make eye contact with the king's secret service. And they look at me and they look at each other and they look kind of puzzled. Because I
Okay.
also realized all of these VIPs have been coming to Bhutan every year for the last 20 years.
Oh,
And never
okay.
before have I come to Bhutan in the last 20 years.
They're
So
probably
he looks.
like, it's that kid from the window.
Exactly. They're like, who is this guy? And I think they got a little stressed, a little worried. And so, the Secret Service guy had been waving everyone to come and, take pictures. And he puts his hand up to me, grabs the king, and they walk the other way. And at this point, you have two choices. Either you accept defeat or you start chasing after the king. Obviously, because what else are we going to do? So I turn to Stitch, Stitch turns to me, and he starts going for it. And I'm like, Stitch, no! Like, this is going to be like an Interpol, like, international incident. You can't, like, just for a picture, you can't. So we're watching from afar as the king goes, like, 20 meters away, takes pictures with other people, and we just have our phones up, obviously looking like tourists and like children, not like VIPs, just in awe that we're so close to the king of Bhutan, who, Bhutan is a big cryptocurrency holder as well, and so who probably owns more, crypto than I've ever seen in my life, and it's just kind of an interesting, really funny experience. But that in a nutshell is the time I almost met the king of Bhutan.
That's amazing. I mean, honestly, you made the right decision. I feel like you guys had pushed the envelope to that to the edge there. So chasing after the king would have probably been over the edge.
I mean, there is a part of me that's like, it was right there, like it wasn't even like a stone's throw away. The distance from the head of your bed to the foot of your bed, that was distance from us to the king. And there is an opportunity. Jonathan Rose is now someone who I reach out to pretty frequently. He came to speak at a class of mine on Tuesday of this week, and I mentioned the funny story of almost meeting him. And he jokingly said, "Oh, well, I'm going back in September, so if you're interested in coming, shoot me an email. Maybe we can get you to have lunch with the king." So there might be a part two to this story in October of this year after I go
I
back to
love it.
Bhutan. So we'll see what actually
I
ends up
love
happening.
it. Michael's journey to meet the king of Bhutan. It's gonna happen, whether through a daughter or Jonathan Rose, apparently.
we'll, see, we'll see what happens. We'll keep our fingers crossed. But yeah, that was Bhutan, and the rest of the trip was also lovely. I went to Parliament, learned about the political scene, met some of the business leaders, um, and it really was again one of, I would say, the most eye opening trips for me, just to see like what could the future of capitalism be if we focused on kind of environmental rights and being carbon negative and all of those things.
Yeah, no, it's a great point that like you never really know it, but across the world in all the different countries, it's kind of like little, I don't want to call it experiments, but it can show you a completely different way of doing things and what it could be like, or maybe what it was like. It seems like one of those really interesting examples.
Exactly. Yeah, and they've really. I think that's why they get so much foreign direct investment. Is because they've really opened themselves up to the world as the place where you can come experiment with the future of buildings or the environment. Or I think that's why the city in the south that they're trying to build will actually be probably a case study in kind of futuristic architecture, right? And the design of cities. They're kind of starting from scratch, which is kind of rare to do in the world where in a place where you may not have capital. And Bhutan is kind of capital rich and willing to experiment, which I think will lead out to a lot of good outcomes for them.
Yeah, that's really interesting about the city that they're building. I feel like that's a concept that's come up a couple times. I know in California there was a group of investors looking to basically build a city from scratch. I know back in my hometown of Toronto, like Google was building this smart city for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's this concept. I mean, even I spent my New Year's after that whole Bhutan trip in Palm Springs, and even like the creation of Palm Springs, like just east of LA, kind of where Coachella happens nowadays. Like even that was like an experiment in like desert cities, like desert civilizations, creating something from nothing that has a unique like spirit to it. And so I don't know, maybe it's just human nature, kind of this idea of villages, temporary or permanent. and making them with some type of unique atmosphere to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that idea of like, hey, are our cities right? Or like, have we done this properly? As things continue to develop, is really interesting because
Exactly,
there's lots of
exactly,
areas we can improve. I think that's pretty clear.
exactly. Yeah,
Well,
and I mean, yeah, urban design is fascinating, but
yeah.
yeah, it's super cool.
Well, I gotta say, I'm like pining to go to Bhutan now and see
Oh
all
my
this.
gosh,
Although I
yeah,
feel like I need to go on National Day. That seems to be the ticket.
it's the best. It's the best time to go. And then if you do go, just hang out by the king's entrance. Just remember to say your king is guest.
the
It's
best
close enough that they might just let you in.
the best part about these stories, impossible to replicate what you just told me. I mean, that's such a so many like twists and turns to the story and ending up where you did. Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, from seeing his photo to watching him from the sixth floor to being, a bed's length away. The only thing could have made it better if we had the photo. I just wish we had a photo with him. It would have been hilarious. But you know what? I'm happy for what we got. We got such a unique experience, and I've never experienced a culture as unique as that, as close as I did
Yeah.
during Bhutan National Day.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, thank you again for taking time to tell this story. That this has been so much fun. I really appreciate it. As I said, I think thank you for teaching us about Bhutan as well. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who didn't know much about the country, kind of like you were saying, you going into all of this. So I really appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
Of course, and for those interested, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff on Bhutan online. There's a really good TED Talk. One of the films was an Oscar nominee. It's a film that like describes Bhutan and the history of Bhutan, and everyone was raving about it because it was nominated for an Oscar. So I think it's an interesting culture. It's definitely something to keep an eye on, especially if you're interested in environmental policy.
Definitely, definitely.
So,
Well, thank you
but thanks so
again.
much, Andrew, for having me on the show. It's awesome to be on.
Thank you for being here, and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.
Well, that's it for this episode. I hope everyone enjoyed Michael's wild trip to Bhutan. What an adventure, and his many attempts to meet the king. Something tells me he'll succeed someday, and I know I'm rooting for him. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on One Off Travel Stories.